Today's a pretty special day for Bethesda games, as today would have been the day that the teasers for Starfield, if it was coming out in 2020 and E3 was still happening this year, would have began. Timeline-wise, today is the equivalent day we got the Please Stand By teasers and eventual teaser trailers for both Fallout 4 and 76. Although unfortunately, that time has come and gone for Starfield with no new announcements being made, at least thus far as I'm recording this. But with that in mind, I wanted to go over some of the crazy or otherwise ridiculous or really interesting leaks to come out for Starfield, Fallout 76, and even the Elder Scrolls 6 over the past couple of weeks or months, and really just give you a rundown of what to expect from this company somewhat in the coming weeks. Of course, when covering leaks, you always have to take it with a grain of salt, but some of these are really interesting, a part of that history or lore as we build up to an eventual release. But speaking of an eventual release, we know that Bethesda is teasing something. We're approaching peak game teaser and information season, and Bethesda is confirmed to be appearing at both Summer Game Fest as well as GameSpot's Play for All event. And despite them being confirmed for both events, and seemingly at some point in June we'll hear something, we still have no dates or other information as to what exactly will be shown. Earlier this year in an interview, Pete Hines definitely alluded to the fact that some Deathloop or Ghostwire Tokyo could be present, but we still don't really know much. And if you want to keep more up to date with that information, I do recommend you follow me on Twitter because that's where I tend to post it if it isn't worthy of a full video. Although going into this, one important note I did want to make is why sometimes listening to leaks is actually a good thing or worth it. As in several instances, leaks have ended up being true, in particular with Bethesda games. We saw a very minor but just random mention of Fallout 76 and supposed leak on 4chan a full year before it was announced. And with Fallout 76 in particular, it really wasn't on too many people's radar, so to predict that one is a bit more commendable. Or even alternatively, there were several Fallout 4 leaks. A great write-up on this was just posted in a Reddit thread that I'll have linked down below. Several of these from random posts years before the game dropped that mention extremely accurate details like Boston, the Institute and Railroad making a return, but then the poster actually claims it was fake in the first place, so it's kind of hard to tell what was happening there. Just an incredibly lucky guess or something else. But either way, one of the first ones I do want to go over are actually some of the Fallout 76 leaks, because these are an interesting topic because you really can't talk about them. As of late, Fallout 76 has had its PTS up and running, and for the foreseeable future, it seems like that will be the case. Bethesda describes wanting to test most of their major updates on this. One of the odd things that has recently happened was a ton of accidental leaking from this. In that, players on the PTS do their typical data mining, but keep it to private channels. Some users leak that private information to public channels, and then several people pick it up not realizing it's leaked information in the first place. One of the big ones was actually this album of future Atomic Shop content was covered by several smaller YouTubers and even other things like Facebook posts, of which Bethesda quickly took them down because it was leaks from the PTS, but people just didn't realize, thought they were just standard data mines from the live version of the game. But considering how much content leaked around Wastelanders with Fallout 76, it does fall now into a pretty interesting bubble, where many content creators can't touch it with a 5-yard stick because you'll get an instant copyright strike, and even things like Facebook, Reddit, or Twitter posts haven't taken down quite swiftly, but a lot of the stuff does end up leaking. We knew a lot about Wastelanders ahead of time, the Overseer's return, the main quest points, and the overall objectives of the story. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds and develops as we start to get into the subsequent story content, with the big Brotherhood of Steel questlines coming later this year. Especially as Bethesda reports only additional plans to expand and grow their private test server. But one of the other particularly interesting and recent leaks to pop up was around Starfield. Specifically, it was this gameplay, posted in a variety of ways, but many times the gameplay itself being the same. So clearly from this, it looks like a space game of some sort. You see some space travel, which would be kind of crazy for Bethesda to pull off in the current engine. Even at one point towards the end, you get a jump as well as an overview of this very interesting looking city. So this leak was fascinating. One of the odd things about this video was it was getting consistently posted and then taken down with different titles and slightly different edits. The same gameplay from a slightly different angle, or even one had interstellar music in the background. Many of them citing it as Starfield gameplay, pre-alpha footage, or just something related to Starfield. And the very interesting thing about this was, even though you could be quite confident it wasn't Starfield, because of the gameplay itself, it clearly doesn't look like a Bethesda game. There are just certain things that would show up, but even further, the use of copyrighted footage does make it seem extremely unlikely. And if this was a genuine Bethesda leaker, I feel like they probably wouldn't have posted the video, taken it down so many times, but the oddity was, nobody could identify the game. You could tell what it looked similar to, or what it wasn't, looking at many of the other space games available, No Man's Sky, Elite Dangerous, and even Star Citizen, but it really wasn't a match for any of them, and several days went by where hundreds of users were scouring the web for all space games and couldn't identify any matches. And it was no accident that people weren't able to find this game because it wasn't actually fully announced yet. The game ended up being Black Body, which got a trailer shortly thereafter the leaks went live that did show it as a space exploration-esque game actually made by a one-man team. There's immediately some suspicion that this was a ploy by the game developer himself to actually get additional attention for his game, although he remains adamant that that wasn't the case, and actually has shown the trailer was posted a bit earlier on things like ArtStation and Instagram, just to not much attention, so not many people could find those via their searches. It's still not clear as to whether or not this leaker was the same game dev, but either way, this is definitely an interesting one, a Starfield leak that convinced some people, but confused a lot because it was a totally unreleased game. But then we have the very interesting saga as to what is likely the most reputable, at least at first glance, Elder Scrolls 6 leak we've gotten thus far. But again, take this one with a grain of salt, and almost more so than usual. About a month ago now, on the Fandom Forums, which is the website hosting many of the popular game wikis, there was a user posting claiming to have some inside information on the Elder Scrolls 6. He describes how he correctly leaked a game in the past on Reddit, which ended up getting fully revealed and he was right, but that correct leak got him a ton of media attention, got him some backlash or controversy on Reddit itself, so he wanted to go to Fandom because it's a bit more tame, a bit smaller, and a more die-hard community. With this leak, he doesn't actually mention his source explicitly, just that he has seen it with his own eyes and it's been shared by a very reliable source, and also being a byproduct of the whole work from home situation that is going on right now. And more or less how the Elder Scrolls 6 will take place in Hammerfell and High Rock 6 years after the events of Skyrim. Hammerfell will large in part be a fairly prosperous area, but conversely, High Rock is designed to be significantly more warring. And in fact, this is intentional because it's meant to showcase some new technology coming with the Elder Scrolls 6, so Bethesda can showcase larger scale battles with hundreds of NPCs active at a given time. And even further, the orcs will have a major part in this warring nature. And in fact, there's one siege 10 times the size of Whiterun Siege involving the orcs. But even further, what may be one of the most surprising parts of all of this, ship travel is described as being a fairly major part of this game. The ship travel is going to be based off of the vehicle mechanics that were developed for Starfield, but then carried over for the Elder Scrolls 6. You'll have a variety to choose from, all the way from a rowboat to full-on four-sail pirate ships, and you could actually inhabit these ships with an NPC crew, and it does feature minimal customization. Also describing how Daggerfall will be the largest city ever built by Bethesda Game Studios, really taking inspiration from CD Projekt Red and what they're doing, seemingly with Cyberpunk 2077. But then he gets into release dates, the release of the Elder Scrolls 6 reportedly being Q4 2024, which honestly is a fairly safe prediction, and Starfield is going to be 2021. So that was the leak itself, which really wasn't all that significant. It is somewhat interesting how it is on Fandom instead of Reddit or some other popular website like 4chan, but there really isn't much to take away from it until a few days later it gets reposted to Reddit, where several users who have been successfully DMing the leaker report that he actually sent them an NDA, or a picture of an NDA. The NDA being from around 2018, right around when the trademarks for Redfall went live. And although the picture of the NDA itself is never posted, one of the mods of the subreddit actually confirms this picture does exist. Although, during these DMs, they could not get the user to confirm the past leak that he was apparently right about. But taking that together, if this really was somebody who does have a picture of an NDA, and correctly predicted games in the past via their leaks, that would be quite significant. It definitely gets you hopeful for the content they posted. And in this, they even managed to get Jason Schreier, the person to correctly leak Fallout 4 and Fallout 76's multiplayer, to give his input on this leak overall and the situation, citing how he couldn't confirm or deny anything, but all of it could be faked. And when you take all of that together, especially many users focusing on how Jason Schreier couldn't deny this information, people got very excited or hyped that this was a legitimate leak. And then immediately were kind of sad that Elder Scrolls 6 was apparently 4 years away still. And the problem with leaks like this are, it's just so plausible. All the information in this is possible. Outside of the vehicle travel, that would be a little iffy or surprising for Bethesda, but all the other things are very likely to occur in this next game and may end up even being true just because of how generalizable they are. Although after all of that, something interesting did happen. A couple of days later, after this got a lots of media attention, videos getting near 1 million views, numerous articles on the topic, the original leaker went back to fandom to report that this was all fake, and frankly in a very properly written response, apologizing for leading everyone astray and describing how his information was not factual, and more or less he wanted to provide fans with something to look forward to, especially with everything happening in the world right now, but this was a poor way to do it, and he recognizes that. So overall, I find this one interesting. When it comes to the NDA, the mods that did verify it do say that it definitely could be faked. I mean, it is relatively easy to fake an NDA, especially if you already have a copy of an NDA. I have an old ZeniMax NDA. I could just change some numbers on that using Inspect Element and make it look very believable. But I also bring this up because we have seen in the past how even leaks that did predict details correctly had the authors come out later and say, no, I was just kidding, this is totally fake. But either way, this one overall is interesting as it is probably the leak thus far to have the most merit behind it. It still is likely 100% fake. I think it's fake, but we got more than just a random Reddit post from a throwaway account. We actually had some background on this one. But then speaking of just random Reddit posts from a throwaway account, we also do have a final one, which is just that. A reported leak on Bethesda Game Studios as well as Starfield and The Elder Scrolls 6, it describes how Starfield will actually be revealed not during the Summer Game Fest, but rather via an online event hosted by Bethesda in August. Described basically as a QuakeCon replacement. It describes Starfield as expected to have a Q2 2021 release, but it could get pushed back to Q3, and it will be a next-gen exclusive, not available on current-gen systems. He goes on to talk about how technically Starfield has been in pre-production since around 2005, but it was more just conceptual, and real production began in 2012, entering full production in Q3 of 2016, following the wrap-up of Nuka World. And right now, how Bethesda Game Studios is split into two teams, one working on 76 and one working on Starfield. Following the release of 76, Rockville, Montreal, and Dallas, 3 of Bethesda studios, have been focused pretty much all hands on deck with Starfield, while Austin, the 4th studio, is focusing still on 76. And then finally ending it off with how The Elder Scrolls 6 is not in full production, and Bethesda plans to release it anywhere from Q3 2024 to Q4 2025. So this leak's interesting because it actually brings up several notable points to talk about, although one thing that could just kill it right off the bat, Bethesda is confirmed to be appearing in Phase 1 of the Summer Game Fest. Seemingly they'll show something, so if this user is describing how Bethesda is going to have their own online event later on, why would they show some games early? You would assume they would save most everything for Summer Game Fest like they typically would with E3. Any further, we know that Bethesda Game Studios Dallas built the Battle Royale mode for Fallout 76, so definitely doesn't fit in with that all hands on deck timeline since 2016 for Bethesda. Although one of the other interesting aspects of this is around an August showcase and an early 2021 release date. Back on April 1st, we heard from Pete Hines that Bethesda would not be hosting a digital showcase in June. Although they have a lot of exciting things to share about their games and they look forward to telling us more in the coming months. So depending on how deeply you want to look into that, it does open up the possibility of Bethesda not hosting a digital showcase this year, but rather just delaying it, having it be in a later month towards the end of summer, perhaps even after summer. Bethesda Game Studios for the past couple of decades, basically, has really likened later in the year release dates to coincide with the holiday season. So with that in mind, many have just kind of assumed Starfield will receive a November release date like many of its predecessors. But an interesting timeline for Bethesda Game Studios and their showcase could be Starfield getting a Q1 or Q2 release date. It'd be very odd, but it would of course coincide with the new console generation. And if that ends up being the case, a Starfield Q2 2021 release date, we would really have no idea as to their marketing or media schedule. So a later in the year showcase could be plausible in that regard. Either way though, this is another leak that I think it's fairly safe to throw away as fake. Several of the things on it may end up just being true because it's a very broad one. Easy to predict comments. Although even among those easy to predict comments, there are still several inaccuracies. Those are the main leaks I wanted to highlight for you for this video. Things are definitely getting desperate when it comes to additional information around these games, in particular with Starfield and the potential of a Starfield 2020 release date. It seems pretty unlikely at this point, but the community around this game has definitely taken and latched on to some things, whether it be community managers liking tweets as evidence of Starfield, Bethesda Game Studios not tweeting as evidence that a release or announcement could be impending, a bunch of trademarks updating all at once, even though it's actually business as usual, and that almost always happens with these trademarks, or even some of the recent ratings to come out, like the PEGI rating or German ratings, which must mean the game is complete for these companies to have reviewed the game and assigned a rating for it. Even though this is just something that shows up on the website for literally a split second, and with Fallout 4 and 76 on their reveal trailers, those ratings weren't even complete, but Starfield somehow managed to get them all qualified even before we get the first proper teaser. If nothing else though, Bethesda's silence still is interesting. Even some of the insiders who have been correctly predicting other information don't really seem to know much about this game. On one hand, it could just be because we're not hearing anything for another year or even longer, which please no. But nonetheless, Bethesda does have something to show us. What that is, or even when it's coming, is still unknown, so all we really have to speculate on are these leaks thus far or tidbits of information as they pop up. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, but until next time, I thank you all again, and I hope to see you all later.